Welcome back to the Burnout Detox Kit podcast, where we crack the truths on what causes burnout for many of us and how our healing journey isn't just a coincidence. Now, before we dive in, if this podcast has moved you in any way at all, take a moment to follow, rate, or share it. Every click helps this mission grow, and it makes it so much easier for people to find the tools they need. Now, let's get into it. Welcome, Rose. Really glad that we're doing this now.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Amazing. Well, it's honestly, it still blows my mind that we've never really crossed paths at both like Revolut and our 11FS days. But here we are finally connecting, and I hope we're connecting for the right reasons as well. And what a better way to go through the topic that unites us both, which is culture, the impact of culture on burnout, and what sustainable performance really looks like, as I know that's a focus for your next stage right now. So let's talk about your association with burnout and culture.
Yeah, sure. So I have kind of spent my career building high performance cultures. That's kind of what I've specialized in since, I guess, my time at Revolut, coming in to solve a culture problem. I guess I've built my career building out high performing teams. So focusing on things like leadership development, culture transformation, making sure that there is real alignment in organizations of their values and behaviors that they're asking from their teams. So yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about, and it's wild that our paths haven't crossed until very recently.
Yeah. And your association with burnout, what have you seen in your experience and how culture impacts that?
So my association with burnout. So for me, I have spent my career working with incredible leaders, so people who are really good at their jobs, super capable, and I always found that they're excelling in one area, that everything else around them seems to be failing. So they're not spending the time that they want to with their families. They're not, eating well. They're not looking after themselves. That they're really burnt out because they're focusing on one thing.
Okay, so right, really interesting that because you and I both come from the same background and we've both seen the impact of culture on performance, but what we hardly talk about is the impact of culture on the well-being part of an employee as well, especially the high performers like what you're saying here, right? So when we're looking at, one of the things that really stayed with me from our conversation the first time we met was this image that you painted about really brilliant, capable people, as you're saying, high achievers. They're doing so well at work, but then they're quietly falling apart in everything else that's happening around them, right? And that hit really close to home for me. For example, I've seen it myself. I've gone through it myself. I have been that person. It was not easy to go through, let alone difficult enough to actually come out of it. And in my mind, it feels like there's this internal collapse of a high performance environment, and the system itself doesn't actually help them thrive in that environment, no matter how ambitious they are as an individual and how much guardrails they give themselves. Can you share a little bit more about the phase in your life of what you have witnessed in those moments?
Yeah, sure. So I think my biggest learning is anyone can perform, anyone can achieve a goal, meet a deadline. And that's where you see people doing really well at work or doing really well at something, but everything else around them, falling apart. The key is creating that sustainable high performance without burnout. So that is the kind of North Star. So for me, I think high performance is the alignment of purpose, direction, trust, and belonging. And it shows up differently at organizational and personal level. And, I think it's much easier to identify at an organizational level because there's studies on it. People, talk about it a lot more than at a personal level. So for me, high performance is not things like presenteeism, being the last person in the office, being the loudest person in the room. It's not being the person that, seemingly picks holes in everything for the sake of picking holes in everything just to say something. So for me, high performance is about impact. It's about moving the needle towards a shared goal. So towards the organizational goals and, ambitions. And I think it's really important to unpack this. So I speak to a lot of people who are too busy. I've got back-to-back meetings all day. I'm doing this very important work. And yes, a lot of it is important, but if you dive into the work that's being done, and I do this as part of my consulting work and also part of my coaching, is about 80% of it is not driving impact. Spending all day on emails, looking at new projects that have nothing to do with the organizational goal, but they sound fun and the competitors doing it, doubling down on policies, things like that is not impact work that's going to drive high performance. And I think that's where it really falls down. I've witnessed this throughout my career, particularly at my time at Revolut, everyone had that shared goal. Everyone had that ambition. You were a unicorn. It was incredible feeling working there, but it wasn't sustainable. It was a really challenging, it was really to sustain that because it was long hours. It was people not quite sure on what their part of that goal was. So yeah, I think that's a key thing to recognize when we're talking about performance. It's not just about achievement. It's about creating sustainable high performance without burnout. And I sometimes have conversations with founders and leaders. And when I mention the word burnout, I see their eyes roll. And actually, burnout is, I think the latest data is it costs the UK economy something like £118 billion a year. So it's not commercially smart not to think about burnout. And it's the right thing to do for your people, but also commercially the right thing to do as well.
And do you think that these founders and leaders that they roll their eyes at you or like they kind of go, "Ooh, let's not talk about this word. Let's not talk about this dirty word because, it's not sustainable and it's not conducive in conversations like this because we want to focus on the positive, which are performance. Let's drive more out of our people rather than saying, let's invest more to take care of our people because I think there are nuances around it, right? Principally, if an organization is built upon a culture that really cares about their people because they want the best out of themselves and their people in order to get the best version of the company. Whereas there are different companies who kind of go, okay, we're all here together. Let's make the one dream come true. We'll do whatever it takes to get there, right? There's no right or wrong, let's be really honest, because I've seen them on both sides of the coin and I equally fit into one more so than the other, but I have also seen success on both sides. So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I also just want to come back to the point where I'm not sure about your experience, but when I do see in my coaching experience, when I see leaders and founders who kind of roll their eyes at the word burnout, it's also because they probably have gone through it very recently or they're in the thick of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When I have these conversations with people, I think that eye roll is just maybe it's just my millennial generation and above. I know Gen Z have a very different opinion, but it's just that's what you got to do. That's part of the job. It's part of success. It's part of getting to where you want to get in your career. And whilst there is an element of that, like, yes, you have to work hard. You have to put in the effort, the work, especially if you really care about something. I think it's the balance between working for the sake of working, which is what a lot of people do. They feel like they have to be in the office because other people are in the office. And, I think office working is really good for collaboration and, um, shared activity purpose work. But it's for being there for the sake of being there, to show you're there, to show you're there late. One of the things at Revolut that I was thinking about this morning, it made me laugh, is people you did used to work late, but you used to get Deliveroo if you worked past 7. So a lot of people would work till 7, pick up their Deliveroo on the way home and take it home with them. So yes, it were long hours, but actually they were getting free dinner out of it, which is kind of funny. Sorry, coming back to your original question, I think there's a lot of stigma around burnout still. I think there's an expectation that people should just go through an element of burnout as part of success. And whilst I think that's important to work hard to get where you want to be, I think the most important thing is thinking about people's overall well-being and long-term impact of that. So making it sustainable practice will allow at an organizational level, will allow your organization to make more money because you're not going to have people disengaged. You are not going to be paying sick pay for people who are signed off. There's loads of research. I think that Deloitte did a study, I think it was earlier this year, for every £1 invested in well-being, there's a £4.70 return on investment. If you told any person, if you put £10 into this, you'll get £47 back, most people would do that. So I think there's a stigma around the word burnout. There's an expectation that people should go through it. And I think people don't really understand how to address it properly. I think people just think that it's a fluffy HR initiative to do monthly yoga or, oh, we've got an EAP, we don't need to do anything else. Actually, preventing burnout is about creating sustainable environments for people so they can do their work well. Creating flexibility for people so they're not stressing about childcare or, looking after other caring responsibilities, taking their dog to the vet, whatever it might be, but giving people a little bit of freedom. Honestly, it opens up that what was called discretionary effort. So people will put in more effort to achieve the organizational goals because they feel trusted and supported. So I think there's a lot of stigma to be removed around it. There's also an element of having to hold up the mirror. If your people are burnt out, there's something wrong in your organization. And some people don't like to face that. So I think understanding that and also the positive commercial impact it has if you do something about it is really, really key.
I love how I love how you're bringing them all together, that it's actually beneficial for the company to be able to, like, to address it, right, as a problem that obviously exists in every organization, whether we like it or not. But sweeping it under the rug is actually not sustainable long term. Calling it out, finding ways to solve it is probably the better solution.
Yeah, and you don't have to call it burnout or you don't have to call it well-being. It can be, a different initiative internally. And people come up with very creative ways to, I know that lots of people are measuring happiness at the moment. And I think the most important thing is that we're taking the mental health and well-being of colleagues and employees seriously, not only because it's the right and the human thing to do, but also commercially, it's the smart thing to do.
Yeah, I love that. So let's come back to your experience then. You've had a turning point that wasn't, I remember what you were telling me was it wasn't some kind of like breakdown, collapsing and stuff like that, but you made fundamentally a personal choice to change the way you work and to change the way you approach work, right? Can you walk us through it? How, because I want people to understand how sometimes we underestimate these small habits that can actually bring grand changes.
Yeah, of course. So for me, kind of the biggest changing point was about 2 years ago. I'd been made redundant recently, which obviously was a very stressful situation to go through. Luckily, I landed a new role. It was a more senior role, which was really exciting. Also, was the sound okay on this? I'm getting a little bit of an echo.
Very strange. It stopped recording just now for a bit, but it's back.
Is that
It's back
is that
now.
okay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. I just started that bit anyway, so I'm happy to
Okay.
start
Yeah.
again. Cool. So yeah, of course. So my kind of turning point for me was about 2 years ago. So I'd just been made redundant from my previous role, which was obviously a very stressful thing to go through. I just packed up my flat in London to go traveling around Europe for 3 months. At the same time, I was just about to start a new role, a more senior role. It was the first time I'd stepped into kind of a directorate role. And to top that all off, I was getting married in July. So three huge things that were really important to me. I wanted to have fun on my trip. I wanted to do really well at work. I've always, my career has always been part of my identity. And obviously, I wanted to enjoy my wedding and look and feel good. So traveling around, I couldn't go to my usual classes and gym and that sort of stuff. So I needed some sort of consistency. And I was just on social media scrolling one Sunday, and someone I followed was talking about a challenge that they just started. It was a 6 week challenge and it ended on my wedding day. So I thought, great, I will do that. The classes were between 5 and 45 minutes each day. And honestly, it just spiraled from there. So I was feeling better in myself. I was making better food choices. I was thinking about fueling my brain so I could work. I wasn't just grabbing, sugary snacks and that sort of thing just to keep me going through the day. I was sleeping better. I was getting up earlier, which is something I had always struggled with. Honestly, my husband will laugh. Like he'd been telling me for years, if you get up earlier, you get more control of your day. Finally, it clicked. And I was doing really well at work. I was building relationships. I was enjoying what I was doing as well. And I was still having time to kind of enjoy my traveling and look forward to my wedding planning. So everything kind of started there. And I would say the most important thing for me is kind of building on those micro habits. It has given me a real sense of self awareness. So I'm not saying for the last 2 years I've never experienced burnout since, or everything has been absolutely swimming since that point. But I really understand myself well enough now to know when I'm starting to get burnt out, to know how to address it and to kind of build my resilience back up. And it's all about kind of those micro habits. So I think that's a really important thing that I learned myself is it doesn't have to be the big things. It can be 5 minutes every day. You can, you know, do small things and make better choices. I guess it's the kind of situation where you choose your hard. Uh, you know, I'm trying to think of an example now, but uh, I can't think of why can't I think of one off the top of my head? But yeah, you choose your hard. So going to the gym is hard, but actually not feeling comfortable in your body or not being able to move or being immobile is harder. So it is a situation of choosing your hard. So I now understand kind of what the best version of myself is and the easiest and quickest way to get there back there. So building resilience.
I love how you're really kind of like associating, coming out of burnout is to rebuild your resilience, because something that I've heard really smart this week from someone I was interviewing was that she said, we all have resilience, but for some reason we go through life and we encounter different things that actually blocks them. And so our whole agenda should be to unblock them so that we can rebuild our resilience again, because we get knocked down each and every step of the way, but it doesn't mean we stay down. And that for me was such a powerful reminder. And I think it really comes back to what you're saying here. The micro habits, whatever you feel that is comfortable for you, it doesn't need to be a grand gesture or a big change, right? What you're really saying is pile on to those small habits so that you can rebuild. That way, you're on the right path for recovery, because recovery is possible, is what we've learned so far. I also love how you have such a positive take on taking a look at this whole culture change. You've gone through redundancy and you've seen how culture changes in the company, from A to B to C to D and so forth. And I know, even from my own personal experience, how surreal it is to actually feel like you're leading transformation one day, and then the next day, you're probably on the receiving end of the restructuring, right? It's inevitable. It happens. We
Mm.
can't change that fact. What I love about your story, though, Rose, is you're talking about reinvention. You've taken it by the horns and you weren't retreating. You were grounded in making sure that it was successful for you. And that's what makes your work so human centered. So, can you talk us through how you make things sustainable, but still maintain that human centered aspect?
So for me, boundaries are really tough. When I work in an organization, I give my heart and soul to it. So that's a really difficult thing, going through that culture transformation to redundancy cycle. I'm very aware that I'm often brought in to do a job to fix something. And then usually they restructure and someone more junior comes in to kind of see the work through. So it's kind of that understanding that it's the job and not the person. And I know that's the kind of HR principle when it comes to restructuring anyway. So when I look at new opportunities, so since leaving my last role, I set up my own consultancy. So I'm now working with organizations to go in and solve these problems. And then when they're done, I can hand them back over, which is great, which is what I've built my career on. But if I was looking at, and even going back a couple of years when I was made redundant before, looking at organizations I would work, I understand what my non negotiables are. So, what is the purpose of the organization? Do their values align with mine? What is their representation of female leadership? What is the work I will be doing? Will it be meaningful work? So, I look at those sorts of things. Obviously, pay and title and that sort of stuff comes into it, but those are the most important things because I think understanding that what you've entered into, if you're aligned with it and you're really passionate about it, those times where you're on that tip of that new stress curve, about to go into burnout, it's worth it and it feels meaningful. It doesn't feel like you're just banging your head against a brick wall. So I think that's really important. And then from a leadership perspective, I always try and lead in a human first way. So I try to be as transparent as possible. I'm quite honest. I'm very vulnerable. So if something has gone wrong or I've made a mistake, I'm quite open about it. And I really want my team to be better than me. So I truly believe that as a leader, I am the custodian of somebody's career. And if the next opportunity isn't available within the organization or is, part of my work with them is their development, because sometimes that transformation to redundancy cycle can go quite quickly. I want them to be in the best possible position to get that next role, especially if it's a restructure and that means I'm leaving and they could potentially be promoted. So understanding that kind of dynamic is really important. And then the final thing for me is I'm really big on feedback. I have had to get very comfortable with uncomfortable conversations throughout my career. Working in, my type of role, I'm always talking about high performance, but a huge element of that is underperformance and addressing that and making sure that's really clear. Whether that's underperformance in terms of their KPIs, but actually a lot of the time the underperformance is alignment with behaviors, which especially at senior level can be really challenging conversations. And I've learned it's much kinder to give feedback as soon as possible. This isn't the most glamorous analogy, but I always think of it as if you have food in your teeth. You would want to know. You wouldn't want to get to 5 o'clock and have had food in your teeth at lunchtime. You would want to know. So I kind of view it like that. And then for me, from a purpose perspective, it's really kind of lit a fire in me around that, that North Star, which I said earlier, is that creating sustainable high performance without burnout. And if you meet burnout along the way, you understand what you can do to build yourself back up. And that's at an individual level, but also at an organizational level as well.
How do you do that from a practicality perspective? Because I know, Rose, you often talk about combining performance psychology and culture strategies to actually, come up with a recipe for sustainable leadership. Like you said, a lot of times to be a great leader is to be able to actually build a path forward for other people that are actually following you, right? So how do we put this into practical terms in an organization? How are you navigating? What other things are you creating at the moment?
Oh, that's a really good question. And it really depends per organization. So I think the key thing is the alignment of the senior leadership team. If there is misalignment between that senior leadership team, creating culture transformation and sustainable high performance is going to be really tricky because nobody knows, who is supposed to be doing what. So being able to kind of cascade that down into the organization, which is one of the most important things about building a high performance team, is that everybody knows their role in achieving that shared goal. So if there's no alignment at that top level, then it's going to make it really difficult for that high performance to cascade down. And that's where you see, that people that show up, the disengagement. That's where you see people kind of quiet quitting or literally just doing their bare minimum to get by, burning out and not really understanding what they're supposed to be working on. And that's where that busy work comes in, emails for the sake of emails, meetings for the sake of meetings that could have been an email, seemingly coming up with these great new ideas, but actually they're not in line with that goal. So that's where that busy work can come in, is if there is a misalignment at a senior level. So that's always where I start. And then from a personal level, when I'm talking about coaching and development, it's always understanding what their strengths and development opportunities are and how they can focus on strengths in line with the need of their role. So I like to use psychometrics as part of my coaching. I also do coaching without psychometrics, but I find they're really interesting because they give you that benchmark against your peer group, especially as a senior leader, so you can see where your strengths are against that group, and then your development areas as well.
And I'm a strength coach myself, so I am totally with you when it comes to psychometric driven coaching, because there is something tangible I have found that people want to lean on to, right? It's research based. There is something for them to kind of refer back to, because as a coach as well, I'm sure you've seen this in your experience. You can't be hand holding the whole time. Eventually, they have to leave the nest and then go and build this new world on their own, and being able to have something to fall back or refer to. I have found that in my coaching practice as well. It's a really good thing to have. It's a beautiful toolkit for them to actually refer back to.
Yeah, and I think anything to do with kind of self-development and especially like well-being and burnout in organizations, something that an organization that is seemingly, very commercial, it should almost be treated like you would treat a sales pipeline and, sales targets, because it's so important. So I think having the data and the science and the research to back that up and say, actually, here is the evidence why this is important. That's why I always bring in kind of the cost of burnout, return on investment in investing in it, because it's a commercial mistake not to care about it.
Right. Like I said, Rose, I really love your optimistic take on burnout. And I have felt that for many, many years, people don't talk about burnout because often, like we said earlier, there's a huge stigma around it. We focus on what went wrong instead of what could happen if we actually didn't do this in the first place, right? It's difficult for people to kind of process preventative measures if the worst has not happened yet because we love being in crisis mode. Let's be honest, that's how we feel like it's the best way for us to learn, unfortunately. But I think there's also power in flipping this around and talking about what right looks like so that we can show what good can happen out of this. I know there's a commercial element to it as well. There are different factors that we are now seeing research do the hard work for us to understand it is important and beneficial for companies to actually focus on this. Now, in your experience, you've worked with people who have led with transparency, or I'm sure you've seen great leaders. And I know you talk about this quite often. You've worked with great leaders who know how to pause when needed. And you were talking about boundaries earlier. That's actually very rare. I'm not sure about how you felt, but in my experience, that's like 1 out of 10 that you meet a really good leader who knows how to do all of the above. Can you share in terms of their mindset or their behaviors, what really stood out in them so that we can be on the lookout for the next great leader for us to kind of model those behavior from?
Yeah, it's really easy to say that's a bad leader and I don't want to lead like that, but it's actually harder to say what a great leader is. So to me, and my experience of great leadership are great leaders are not perfect. They are willing to learn, they make mistakes, they own those mistakes and kind of talk about always do a bit like a lessons learned, a debrief, a stop, start, continue off the back of it. They're vulnerable. So they say, I'm feeling stressed right now about this project, or I'm not sure what's going to happen. They listen. They truly listen. They don't just nod. They truly listen, and they explain why something can't be done. So if you're raising concerns of this leader, they're explaining why something can't be done off the back of those concerns. It could be, it's not a priority right now in line with kind of our overall organization goal, but it's not just fed back and then forgotten or brushed under the carpet or just a no. And I've mentioned this already, but the biggest thing is that team alignment. So if you were to ask any member of their team why they're doing what they're doing, they all know why. Nobody knows why nobody doesn't know why they're there. They're really clear on what's expected of them.
I enjoyed listening to you talk about these great leaders. The most prominent thing I have seen over and over again is great leaders are very accountable for their own actions. They're so willing to listen and take on feedback because they know they can get better from here on.
Yeah, and they want to surround themselves with people who are better than them, who can share ideas and they can bounce ideas off. The best leader I've worked for, she brought people into her team who were truly better at elements of her role than she was because she was a generalist. So she wanted specialists in particular areas. And that's what made her fantastic because she knew what she was very self-aware. She knew what she didn't know. She wasn't trying to have this big ego. She wanted to have a team of specialists, and that's why it worked really well.
Right. Now, Rose, this part of our conversation really struck me the first time we met because it's something I deeply believe into. The systems shape us, whatever environment that you're in. We're talking about culture systems here. But sometimes we underestimate our own power to shape the system in whatever role you play in the organization. Because I think, coming back to the earlier conversation, is the fact that it's so easy to put the blame on others when something doesn't work for us, right? This is about looking inward. What part do we play and what is our power to actually change, influence, and shape them eventually? Whether it's a team member, whether it's a leader, whoever it is in that or the organization, if they're visualizing someone saying no for the first time and then they get really scared of it, these are micro moves. These are micro behaviors that we really should be paying attention to. So, what are some of the smallest, but you have seen the most powerful ways of any individual reclaim their agency in, say, I don't want to call it toxic, but let's call it a rigid environment?
So I think the first thing and probably the most important thing is that self-awareness piece and understanding their role in the situation. So often I will speak to people who will be complaining about their boss or they'll be talking about a colleague who's really frustrating without looking at kind of personalities in depth. I think understanding that a lot of the time these miscommunications or frustrations between these working relationships come down to misalignment and poor communication. So misalignment on what people should be working on, poor communication. So people thinking a task is one thing, delivering it, and then being told it was something completely different. So I think having your own self awareness and taking responsibility for your part in it is really important. But then off the back of that, if you're working with someone who is really challenging, understanding and being able to recognize those red flags is so important. So if you're working in that environment where you're thinking that didn't quite sit right, or I don't feel comfortable going into this, or every time this person messages me on Slack, I have heart palpitations. And I wrote about this in my Substack recently about kind of your executive functioning when you're under these states of stress and kind of the importance of taking a step back. But understanding the red flags is really, really important. So understanding what it is that is causing that discomfort. So when there's charm offenses, when people are gaslighting you, so being able to start naming these things and, able to call it out and start writing it down, I think is a really important thing, because that also helps you reflect on, is this truly the situation or is it in my head? Understanding red flags as well is really important. So those are the two key things. So self-awareness, your role in the situation, what you can do about it, what's in your control. So if it is misalignment or miscommunication, sitting down with that person and having a conversation. And then that recognition of red flags, so understanding what behaviors are making you feel uncomfortable, not quite right, flagging those charm offenses and gaslighting, being able to name it, write it down, move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying here. And sometimes, all of this wrapped up, we're very vulnerable as, as people, as employees in an organization. And very often we kind of dim that vulnerability down. It's because it may be seen as being weaker than we have expected ourselves to be, or other people expected us to be, right? So I'm really glad that you brought this up, because the conversation about vulnerability at work is very complicated. Even as a leader myself, I have to pick my battles. I have to show different sides of myself as much as I don't want to. This whole saying around, you have to be 100% authentic at work. I am authentic, except that I need to pick the right conversations to be had with different people, right? Because how they respond is going to directly impact the consequences or the next steps. So I have to make calculated risk around it. But not everybody gets to be in that position to kind of make calculated risk, like I said. And we like to just point out and say people need to bring their whole selves to work. But at the same time, there are so many different kind of environments that actually punishes them when they do. I mean, I myself have had those experiences, which is why I learned the way that I communicate with people right now needs to be slightly different from, I would imagine, 5, 6 years ago, when I had no idea that vulnerability was going to be something that I would be, in my own experience, be taken advantage of, right? So I've had to learn it the hard way. But sometimes also we have leaders who are so willing to open doors, gives us the capacity to be vulnerable, and then continue to encourage us to be the best version of ourselves. If there are situations where people have leaders who don't respect their space and have not given them their space to be themselves or the true selves, right? Or give them the opportunity to learn. And you're saying that there is accountability in ourselves to learn the role we play so that we can then make those influential choices. How do we rebuild trust if the environment doesn't allow us to?
That's such a good question, Sophie. So that's a really good question, Sophie. Um, Sorry, now I've got some echo feedback on my headphones. I don't know why that's happened.
You can hear it, but I can't hear it.
Echo cancellation. Oh, it can't be
Ah,
changed
yeah.
in recording. Okay. I think that's Oh, sorry, it's really echoing in my ear. I don't know what's happened. Let me just put them in and back in again. Sorry, Sophie. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It didn't have any echo on my side. So
Oh, it's still echoing on my side. I'll try and answer it, but if it comes across really awkward, then please ignore me. Maybe I'll turn my volume down so I can't hear it. There we go. Can you still hear me?
yeah, I can hear you
Okay,
perfectly.
perfect. So I truly believe the greatest relationship you can have is with yourself. I think there are a couple of key things that you can do here. So understand those small things that are in your control that you can build, and that helps you build trust by doing those little things every single day. It could be 5 minutes, it could be things like journaling, breath work, but honestly, that will start to make such a huge difference. It's understanding and recognizing those things that will build your resilience, that you can do those micro habits every single day. And the other thing, which is unbelievably important and is not spoken about enough, in my opinion, is how you speak to yourself. So, women especially, but in general, people are very, very critical of themselves. But women particularly are so, so critical. I hear people in my coaching sessions say things like, I'm a failure, I'm a bad mother, I can't do my job, I can't do this. And when you're working with that, with someone who has broken down your confidence and resulting in you losing trust in yourself, it can be really easy to have this loop of negative self-talk. And I came across an approach probably last year, but think of your favorite friend, your most kind sunshine friend who you love. Would you speak to them like that? And if the answer is no, then you need to have a word with yourself. So there's loads of writing and research that you can do on this that can help with this. But really starting to work on that relationship with yourself and how you speak to yourself is so important. You are capable, you can do your job. You're working in a difficult situation, but you're resilient, you can get through it. And it's just kind of working on those two key things to rebuild that relationship with yourself, which will rebuild the trust and rebuild your confidence over time.
Amazing. I think you're absolutely right. We are so critical with ourselves, but then at the same time, if we're really hoping for change and we do have the power, like we say here, we are accountable as much as other people in this particular system that's failing us, right? But if we want to reclaim our power and do what we can to actually influence even small micro changes like we're talking about today, it's all about the tiny habits, it's all about the micro changes that makes huge differences in the future. Is if we're kinder to ourselves, then maybe we would have the power to do so.
Yes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rose. Well, for someone listening right now, this is a very important question that I ask every guest in every episode. If they're in the thick of it, they have a lot of pressure on them right now. What would be the one truth you want them to hear so that they can start making small changes?
Just taking a step back, I think what's really helpful is looking at what's weighing you down. Is it work? Is it something personally? A lot of people are not feeling great in themselves at the moment. Really understanding and identifying and naming it, and then being able to create just some small habits.
I love how you just call out that, if you're trying to achieve someone else's dreams, then it's not important to you. It's as simple
No,
as
it
that.
shouldn't be.
Well, thank you, Rose, for spending the time today, for sharing this space with me. I am so grateful to be hearing your grounding energy, your story, how much you have kind of like gone through in this transformation space for yourself, right? Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, Rose,
Thank you
for
so much for
sharing all
inviting
of
me
this.
on. It's been great speaking with you.
Same, same. I'm so, like I said, I cannot say this enough, but I'm so glad that we finally crossed paths at
Yes.
such a beautiful time of our lives. Here's to more conversations, more honest conversations around helping others find their way back to themselves.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
Great.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you for listening and for helping me grow this project, one honest story at a time. If you can take a moment to follow, rate, or share it with someone who will be forever grateful, make sure you do that. So until next time, keep building on your toolkit and remember, you are never alone on this journey.